The Volanthi had watched Earth for 3 standard cycles before they decided to make contact. Their scientists studied the humans from orbit, recording everything they could see. They watched the cities grow larger. They watched the wars that never seemed to end. They watched the humans burn fuel that poisoned their own air. The Volanthi took careful notes and made their judgments. Ambassador Kethril read the final report in his private chamber aboard the observation vessel. The conclusions were clear. Humans were a young species, barely capable of leaving their own planet. They had only discovered flight a little over 100 years ago. They still fought each other over resources and ideas. Their technology was crude. Their social structures were chaotic. The report classified them as Category 7, which meant primitive and non-threatening. Kethril found this assessment comforting. The Volanthi Collective needed new mining territories, and the asteroid belts near Earth contained valuable minerals. A Category 7 species would be easy to negotiate with. They would accept whatever terms the Collective offered and be grateful for the attention. The first meeting took place in a large building that humans called the United Nations. Kethril brought 14 specialists with him, each one an expert in their field. The humans brought representatives from many different nations, all of them nervous and excited. Kethril noticed how they stared at his elongated form, at his silver skin, at the way his eyes reflected light. He had seen this reaction many times from primitive species. Fear mixed with wonder. The negotiations were simple. The Volanthi wanted mining rights to several asteroid belts. In exchange, they would give humanity access to basic medical technology and educational databases. These were things the Volanthi considered worthless knowledge so old and simple that every child in the collective learned it before their 10th year. But to the humans, it would seem like magic. The human leaders accepted the terms quickly. Too quickly, some of Kethril's advisors whispered. They said the humans should have bargained harder, should have asked more questions, should have shown more caution. But Kethril dismissed these concerns. What could a species that had only recently learned to split atoms possibly do with information they could not understand? The Volanthi had spent 6,000 years building their knowledge base. Humans would need centuries just to comprehend the basics. 3 months passed. Kethril remained on Earth to oversee the early stages of mining operations. He attended meetings with human officials and answered their endless questions. They wanted to know everything about Volanthi culture, history, and science. Their curiosity was almost childlike. Kethril found it amusing at first, then slightly annoying. Then the first report arrived from the Collective's Scientific Monitoring Division. Human researchers had decoded the mathematical frameworks contained in the educational databases. This was expected. The frameworks were designed to be understood. What was not expected was what the humans did next. They found 17 errors in the databases and submitted corrections. Kethril read the report twice to make sure he understood it correctly. The errors were small, mostly rounding problems in complex equations. The Volanthi had used those equations for thousands of years without noticing the mistakes. Human mathematicians had found them in 90 days. He immediately contacted the Patented Monitoring Division and demanded an explanation. The division leader, a scientist named Yethival, appeared on his screen looking troubled. "We have verified the corrections," Yethival said. "They are accurate. We are updating our own databases accordingly." "How is this possible?" Kethril asked. "These are advanced theoretical frameworks. Our students spend decades mastering them." Yethival spread his hands in the Volanthi gesture of uncertainty. "We do not know. Perhaps they had one exceptional individual who happened to notice the patterns. These things occur occasionally among young species. A prodigy appears, makes contributions far beyond their civilization's level, and then normal development resumes." Kethril accepted this explanation. It made sense. Every species produced occasional geniuses. The humans had simply gotten lucky with their timing. 6 months later, another report arrived. Human physicists had published papers extending Volanti energy theories in new directions. The papers contained ideas that Volanti scientists had never considered. The monitoring division was still evaluating whether the ideas were correct, but early assessments suggested they were sound. Catherall began to feel the first stirring of unease. He requested more detailed observation of human scientific activities. What he learned disturbed him deeply. The humans were not waiting to fully understand one concept before moving to the next. Instead, they studied everything at once. They shared information constantly through electronic networks that connected their entire planet. When one researcher encountered a problem, they posted it for others to see. Within hours, sometimes within minutes, other researchers from different countries would offer suggestions. They formed teams that competed against each other, racing to solve the same problems. They argued loudly and disagreed often. Their scientific meetings looked more like battles than discussions. But somehow, from all this chaos, answers emerged. Most troubling of all, they did not sleep the way other species did. Or rather, they slept in shifts. While one group of humans rested, another group continued working. Their laboratories never went dark. Their networks never went quiet. They pushed themselves to exhaustion and then pushed further. Catherall submitted a revised assessment to the Finer and to the Futuristic Collective's High Council. He warned them that humans might advance faster than initially predicted. He recommended closer monitoring and possible restrictions on information sharing. The High Council acknowledged his report and filed it for review. They had more pressing matters to attend to. A Category 7 species, no matter how enthusiastic, posed no real concern. The collective had dealt with thousands of primitive civilizations over their long history. Humans were nothing special. In his private moments, Catherall was not so sure. He had started taking walks through human cities, observing their daily lives. He watched their children in schools, absorbing information like empty vessels, desperate to be filled. He watched their workers adapt to new tools within days. He watched their artists create new forms of expression by combining old ideas in unexpected ways. Something was different about this species. They learned not just quickly, but hungrily. They treated knowledge not as a gift to be carefully preserved, but as a resource to be consumed and transformed. Every answer they found led them to ask 10 new questions. At night, when Catherall looked up at the stars from his temporary residence on Earth, he wondered if the collective had made a mistake. They had given the humans a small taste of knowledge, expecting gratitude and submission. Instead, the humans had taken that taste and demanded more. 1 year after first contact, human engineers launched their first vessel using modified Volanti design principles. It was crude and inefficient by collective standards, but it worked. And Catherall knew with growing certainty that it was only the beginning. The emergency meeting of the Volanti High Council took place in the Chamber of Ancient Wisdom, a vast hall that had witnessed 10,000 years of deliberations. The 12 council members sat in their traditional positions, arranged in a circle, beneath a ceiling painted with the history of Volanti expansion across the stars. Today, that history felt less certain than it had before. But Kethvin, eldest of the council members, called the meeting to order. Her voice carried the weight of 400 years of life and service. We are gathered to discuss the situation regarding Earth and its inhabitants. I have reviewed the latest reports. I confess I find them difficult to believe. She gestured, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed technical schematics that made several council members lean forward in alarm. This is the propulsion system used in our military vessels, the Kethvin continued. It is classified at the highest level. No species outside the collective has ever been given access to these designs. Yet human engineers have somehow recreated the core principles. Council member Vethrol, who oversaw military intelligence, spoke with barely contained frustration. They did not steal the designs. We have verified this repeatedly. They observed the energy signatures produced by Ambassador Kethria's vessel when it arrived on Earth. From those signatures alone, they extrapolated the underlying physics. That should not be possible, another council member said. Our best scientists spent 800 years developing that technology. How could primitives reverse engineer it from mere observation? We do not know, Vethrol admitted. But we must accept that they did. The Kethvin raised her hand for silence. Let us review what we know. It has been 2 years since first contact. In that time, humans have not only mastered the educational materials we provided, but have extended them. They have developed propulsion technology we did not give them. They have cracked encryption protocols that were considered unbreakable. They have begun trading with 3 other spacefaring civilizations. She paused to let this information settle. The question before us is simple. How do we respond? Far from the council chamber, on a small planet called Earth, Dr. James Morrison was having a very different kind of meeting. He stood in front of a whiteboard covered in equations, explaining his team's latest breakthrough to a group of exhausted but excited researchers. The Volanti assumed that propulsion and communication technologies must be developed separately, Morrison said, tapping the board with his marker. But look at what the Threlkai showed us about wave propagation. And look at what the Minari discovered about quantum tunneling. If we combine these principles with the Volanti energy frameworks, a young physicist named Lin Wei interrupted him. We could create a system that does both. Propulsion and instant communication in one device. Exactly, Morrison grinned. The Volanti never thought to try this because they developed each technology centuries apart. They were too invested in their existing systems to see the connections. This was happening everywhere across Earth, in laboratories and universities, in corporate research centers and government facilities. Human scientists were devouring knowledge from every alien species willing to share. They did not approach this knowledge with reverence or caution. They approached it like hungry wolves discovering a field full of prey. Dr. Sarah Chun, a mathematician who had become famous for correcting the Volanti database errors, led a team dedicated to finding connections between different alien sciences. Every species we've met developed in isolation, she explained during a conference broadcast worldwide. They each solved problems in their own way, never comparing notes. But we have access to all of them at once. We can see patterns they never could. Her team had discovered that the Volanti were excellent at theoretical physics, but weak in material science. The Threlkai had incredible materials, but primitive computing systems. The Minari had advanced biology, but had never developed strong mathematics. By combining insights from all 3, human researchers were making advances that none of the original species had achieved. The Volanti Monitoring Division watched all of this with growing alarm. They submitted report after report to the High Council, each one more urgent than the last. They are not just learning, Yethval wrote in his final assessment before requesting reassignment. They are evolving their entire approach to knowledge. They treat information like a living thing, something to be bred and combined and improved. They share everything freely, holding nothing back. When one of them makes a discovery, it belongs to all of them within hours. This should create chaos. Instead, it creates acceleration. Back in the Chamber of Ancient Wisdom, the High Council debated endlessly about how to respond. Some members wanted to cut off all contact with humanity immediately. Others argued for military intervention before the humans grew too powerful. A few suggested trying to negotiate, New agreements with stricter limits on information sharing. The Kethvan listened to all of these arguments. But her attention kept returning to one detail in the reports that the others seemed to overlook. Human scientists regularly worked themselves to the point of physical collapse. They sacrificed personal relationships and health in pursuit of knowledge. They competed fiercely against each other, while somehow also collaborating closely. It was not efficient. It was not rational, but it was terrifyingly effective. We spent 6,000 years building our civilization, the Kethvan said quietly, mostly to herself. We took our time. We were careful. We were methodical. We assumed all species must develop this way. She looked up at the painted ceiling, at the proud history of Volanti achievements stretching back millennia. What if we were wrong? What if speed matters more than we ever imagined? On Earth, the first human-designed interstellar vessel prepared for launch. It was called the Unity, a name chosen by global vote. The ship incorporated technology from 4 different alien civilizations, all of it modified and improved by human engineers. Its primary designer was a team of researchers whose average age was 28 years old. Ambassador Kethral, who had remained on Earth against the advice of his superiors, watched the launch from a viewing platform. He stood among thousands of cheering humans, feeling utterly alone despite the crowd. A human official standing nearby noticed his expression. "Amazing, isn't it?" the official said. 5 years ago, we had never met an alien. Now we're about to travel to other stars. Kethral tried to find words. How could he explain that what humans saw as triumph, his people saw as terror? How could he describe the fear of watching a species sprint past you when you had always assumed you were running the only race? Yes, he finally managed. It is amazing. The Unity launched in a blaze of light that briefly turned night into day. As it disappeared into the darkness above, Kethral understood that everything was about to change. The galaxy had operated under certain rules for thousands of years. The old species moved slowly and carefully. The young species followed or fell behind. Humans were breaking those rules, and the Volanti had no idea how to stop them. The Volanti war fleet assembled at the edge of human-controlled space, a display of power meant to terrify and overwhelm. 1,200 vessels hung in the void like silver needles, each one carrying enough weapons to destroy cities. Admiral Yethmara stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching the tactical display with cold satisfaction. "Signal the other ships," she commanded. "Formation complete. Prepare to transmit the ultimatum." Her communications officer hesitated. "Admiral, the High Council's instructions were to negotiate first. They did not authorize. The High Council is composed of fools," Yethmara interrupted. "They debated while the humans grew stronger. They sent diplomatic missions while human ships explored our borders. I will not make the same mistake. This ends now." She had studied humans for 3 years, ever since the Council assigned her to develop contingency plans. She had watched their impossible progress with a mixture of fascination and horror. She had concluded, reluctantly, that negotiation would never work. Humans did not respect boundaries. They did not accept limits. The only language they would understand was force. The ultimatum was broadcast on all frequencies, translated into every human language. "People of Earth, this is Admiral Yethmara of the Volanti Collective. You have violated the terms of our agreement by developing forbidden technologies. You have stolen knowledge that was not given to you freely. You have threatened the stability of this region of space." She paused, allowing her words to reach across the void. "You will surrender all advanced technology immediately. You will accept permanent oversight from collective monitors. You will submit to cognitive limitation protocols to prevent future violations. These terms are not negotiable. Refusal will result in the complete destruction of your civilization." You have 1 standard hour to respond. On Earth, emergency meetings convened in every major government. Military commanders argued about whether resistance was possible. Scientists frantically calculated the odds of survival. Religious leaders called for prayer. Ordinary people looked up at the sky and wondered if they would live to see another sunrise. In a quiet laboratory in Geneva, Dr. Sarah Chun read the ultimatum with surprising calm. She had expected something like this for over a year. The Volanti were too proud, too certain of their superiority, to accept human progress peacefully. She had prepared accordingly. "Are we ready?" she asked her team. A young researcher named Marcus nodded. "The message is prepared. We verified the translation 17 times. Broadcasting now." Across space, Admiral Yethmara received an unexpected communication. It came not from human governments, but from a small research facility. The sender was identified as Dr. Sarah Chun, a name that appeared frequently in Volanti intelligence reports. The Admiral recognized her as one of the most dangerous humans alive. "Admiral Yethmara," Chun's voice was steady and clear. "We received your ultimatum. Before you proceed, there is something you should know." The Admiral gestured for her communications officer to continue the transmission. She was curious what desperate argument the humans would attempt. The Volanti war fleet assembled at the edge of human-controlled space, a display of power meant to terrify and overwhelm. 1,200 vessels hung in the void like silver needles, each one carrying enough weapons to destroy cities. Admiral Yethmara stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching the tactical display with cold satisfaction. "Signal the other ships," she commanded. "Formation complete. Prepare to transmit the ultimatum." Her communications officer hesitated. "Admiral, the High Council's instructions were to negotiate first." "They did not authorize. The High Council is composed of fools," Yethmara interrupted. "They debated while the humans grew stronger. They sent diplomatic missions while human ships explored our borders. I will not make the same mistake. This ends now." She had studied humans for 3 years, ever since the Council assigned her to develop contingency plans. She had watched their impossible progress with a mixture of fascination and horror. She had concluded, reluctantly, that negotiation would never work. Humans did not respect boundaries. They did not accept limits. The only language they would understand was force. The ultimatum was broadcast on all frequencies, translated into every human language. "People of Earth, this is Admiral Yethmara of the Volanti Collective. You have violated the terms of our agreement by developing forbidden technologies. You have stolen knowledge that was not given to you freely. You have threatened the stability of this region of space." She paused, allowing her words to reach across the void. "You will surrender all advanced technology immediately. You will accept permanent oversight from collective monitors. You will submit to cognitive limitation protocols to prevent future violations. These terms are not negotiable. Refusal will result in the complete destruction of your civilization. You have 1 standard hour to respond." On Earth, emergency meetings convened in every major government. Military commanders argued about whether resistance was possible. Scientists frantically calculated the odds of survival. Religious leaders called for prayer. Ordinary people looked up at the sky and wondered if they would live to see another sunrise. In a quiet laboratory in Geneva, Dr. Sarah Chun read the ultimatum with surprising calm. She had expected something like this for over a year. The Volanti were too proud, too certain of their superiority, to accept human progress peacefully. She had prepared accordingly. "Are we ready?" she asked her team. A young researcher named Marcus nodded. "The message is prepared. We verified the translation 17 times. Broadcasting now." Across space, Admiral Yethmara received an unexpected communication. It came not from human governments, but from a small research facility. The sender was identified as Dr. Sarah Chun, a name that appeared frequently in Volanthi intelligence reports. The Admiral recognized her as one of the most dangerous humans alive. Admiral Yethmora. Chun's voice was steady and clear. We received your ultimatum. Before you proceed, there is something you should know. The Admiral gestured for her communications officer to continue the transmission. She was curious what desperate argument the humans would attempt. We know about the silence, Chun said. Yethmara felt her blood turn cold. She gripped the edge of her command console, struggling to maintain composure. No one outside the collective's highest leadership knew about the silence. It was the most closely guarded secret in Volanthi history. 8,000 years ago, Chun continued, your ancestors encountered a species called the Prethkai. Like us, they learned faster than you expected. Like us, they threatened to surpass you. Unlike us, they had no warning of what was coming. The Admiral's tactical display flickered. New contacts were appearing at the edges of the system. Ships of unfamiliar design, emerging from concealed positions. You erased them so completely that no other civilization knows they existed, Chun said. You destroyed their worlds, wiped their databases, executed every survivor. You thought you had succeeded perfectly. But the Prethkai were clever. They hid their final message in the only place they knew would survive your purge. Chun paused. They encoded it in the mathematical constants of your educational databases. The same databases you gave us. We found it 18 months ago. On the bridge of the flagship, Yethmara watched her tactical display fill with hostile contacts. 17 different ship designs, representing 17 different species. Some of them were Volanthi client races, supposedly loyal to the collective. Others were civilizations the Volanthi had dismissed as irrelevant. All of them were armed and moving into attack formation. We have spent the past year sharing everything we discovered, Chun said. The Prethkai message. The evidence of what you did to them. The records of how you have manipulated and controlled other species for millennia. Every civilization in this sector now knows the truth. Admiral Yethmara finally found her voice. You are bluffing. Our allies would never betray us. Your allies are as afraid of you as we were, Chun replied. They stayed loyal because they saw no alternative. Now they do. A new voice entered the channel, speaking in a guttural language that the translator identified as Threlkai. The Threlkai Concordance stands with humanity. We remember the treaties your ancestors forced upon us. We remember the technologies you denied us. Today, that changes. Another voice followed, then another. Representatives from species across the sector, each declaring their support for humanity and their rejection of Volanthi authority. Some spoke of ancient grudges. Others spoke of recent insults. All of them spoke with the conviction of those who had nothing left to lose. Yethmara stared at her tactical display, watching the numbers shift against her. Her 1,200 ships were now outnumbered nearly 3-1. The combined fleet surrounding her had weapons from dozens of different technological traditions, many of which her tacticians had never studied. This is your choice, Admiral, Chun said. You can fight. You will lose, but you can fight. Your fleet will be destroyed, and then the combined forces of 17 species will descend upon the collective's home systems. Everything your ancestors built over 10,000 years will be swept away. The Admiral's hands trembled. She had trained her entire life for war, but she had never imagined a war like this. Or you can stand down. Return to collective space. Tell your High Council that the old order is finished. Tell them that a new age has begun, one where knowledge flows freely and no single species can hoard power over others. You would let us go? Yethmara asked, her voice barely a whisper. After everything we planned to do to you? We don't want revenge, Chun said. We want the same thing we've always wanted. We want to learn. We want to grow. We want to see what's possible when everyone works together, instead of trying to keep others down." She paused. "You taught us, Admiral. Not the lessons you intended, but lessons nonetheless. The most important one was this: a species that hoards knowledge is a species that stagnates. A species that shares knowledge is a species that thrives. You tried to keep us primitive. Instead, you showed us exactly what not to become." The Admiral looked around her bridge at the faces of her officers. They were waiting for her orders. They would follow her into battle if she commanded it. They would die at her word. Yethmora thought of her children back home, of her mate, of the world she had sworn to protect. She thought of the Prethkai, erased from history, remembered now only because humans had been curious enough to find their hidden message. "Stand down," she said quietly. "All ships, stand down." Her officers stared at her in shock. "Admiral, the war is over," Yethmora interrupted. "It ended before it began. Signal the collective. Tell them." She struggled to find the right words. "Tell them the humans have won." Across the void, aboard ships from 17 different species, beings who had never had reason to trust each other watched the Volanti fleet power down its weapons. Many of them did not yet believe it was real. They had lived so long under Volanti dominance that freedom seemed like a dream. On Earth, Sarah Chun closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel relief. They had gambled everything on this moment. If the Admiral had chosen to fight, if the allied species had lost their nerve, if the Volanti had called their bluff about the extent of their preparations, humanity would have been destroyed. But the gamble had paid off. Not because humans were stronger or wiser than the Volanti, but because they had learned faster. They had found secrets buried for millennia. They had built alliances in a fraction of the time their ancestors took to build nations. They had transformed themselves from primitives to galactic players in less than a decade. And now, looking up at the stars that had once seemed so distant, Sarah Chun began to imagine what they might accomplish next. The years following the standoff brought changes that no one had predicted. Not even the humans who had triggered them. The Volanti collective did not collapse immediately. Instead, it fractured slowly, like ice melting under a spring sun. Client species that had served the collective for thousands of years began demanding independence. Some negotiations were peaceful. Others were not. Admiral Yethmora returned home to find herself branded a traitor by some and a hero by others. The High Council had split into factions, each blaming the others for the catastrophe. The Kethvin, who had seen this disaster coming but failed to prevent it, resigned from her position and retreated to a remote world to contemplate her failures. On Earth, humanity struggled to adjust to its new role in galactic affairs. They had spent their entire existence as the newcomers, the underdogs, the species that had to fight for every scrap of progress. Now they found themselves at the center of a vast coalition of civilizations, all looking to them for leadership. Dr. Sarah Chen, who had never wanted to be famous, became one of the most recognized humans in known space. She gave speeches to alien assemblies, negotiated treaties between species that had been enemies for centuries, and somehow found time to continue her research into the connections between different technological traditions. "We never asked to be leaders," she said during an interview broadcast across 17 star systems. "We just asked questions that others had stopped asking. We combined ideas that others had kept separate. We refused to accept that progress had to be slow." She paused, looking directly at the camera. "Anyone can do what we did. Any species can learn faster, adapt quicker, push harder. We are not special. We simply refused to believe we had to be slow." This message became the foundation of what humans called the open knowledge movement. The idea was simple. No species should hoard information. Every discovery, every innovation, Every insight should be shared freely with anyone willing to learn. The movement spread faster than anyone expected, carried by young members of species that had chafed under the old restrictions. Not everyone embraced this philosophy. Some civilizations had built their entire economies around controlling access to knowledge. They saw the open knowledge movement as a threat to their power and fought against it through diplomacy, economic pressure, and sometimes violence. Ambassador Kethrol, who had remained on Earth through all the changes, found himself in an unexpected position. He had once represented the Volanti Collective. Now he represented something new, a reformed Volanti faction that wanted to join the movement rather than fight it. "My people are not evil," he explained to a human journalist. "We were afraid. We had seen what happened when knowledge spread too quickly. We had witnessed civilizations destroy themselves with technologies they could not control. We thought restriction was the answer. We were wrong." He looked older than he had during first contact, his silver skin marked with lines of stress and worry. "Your species showed us that speed itself is not the danger. The danger lies in isolation, in secrecy, in the belief that some beings are worthy of knowledge while others are not. When knowledge flows freely, mistakes can be corrected quickly. When knowledge is restricted, mistakes become catastrophes." The coalition that humanity had helped build grew stronger with each passing year. Former enemies found common ground in the pursuit of understanding. Species that had never communicated began exchanging ideas. The barriers that had divided the galaxy for millennia began to crumble. Dr. James Morrison, who had helped develop the first human-designed interstellar propulsion system, led a project that brought together scientists from 40 different species. Their goal was ambitious: to develop a new kind of energy source that combined principles from every known tradition. "We keep finding connections we never expected," he reported. "The Minari biological systems can be adapted to regulate Volanthi energy matrices. The Threlkai materials can stabilize reactions that would destroy anything else we've tried. Every species we talked to adds something new to the puzzle." The project took 7 years, far longer than Morrison had hoped, but far shorter than traditional development would have required. When they finally succeeded, they did not patent the technology or restrict its distribution. They published everything, making the designs available to any civilization that wanted them. The old powers watched this happen with a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. The Volanthi had spent centuries developing their energy systems, protecting every detail with layers of security. Humans had accomplished something similar in less than a decade and then given it away for free. "They do not think like us," the Kethvan wrote in a private journal that would later become one of the most studied documents in galactic history. "We build walls around knowledge, believing this protects it. They tear walls down, believing this strengthens it. We measure progress in centuries. They measure it in years. We ask what has been done. They ask what could be done." She paused in her writing, staring out at the stars from her remote refuge. "I wonder sometimes if we could have been different. If we had encountered another species like them earlier in our history, could we have learned from their example? Or was our caution inevitable, a natural response to the dangers of the universe?" She never found an answer to this question, but she took comfort in the fact that future generations would not have to struggle with the same dilemmas. The galaxy was changing. The old rules were being rewritten, and somewhere in that transformation, there might be room for her people to become something new. 50 years after first contact, a monument was erected on Earth to commemorate the anniversary. It stood in the same plaza where Kethrol had first addressed human leaders, a towering structure made from materials donated by dozens of different species. At its base was an inscription translated into every known language. "Learning is not a gift to be hoarded. It is a fire to be shared. The more it spreads, the brighter it burns." Dr. Sarah Chun, now elderly but still active in research, attended the dedication ceremony. She stood among beings from across the galaxy, friends and former enemies, skeptics and believers. She remembered the fear she had felt during the standoff with the Volante fleet. She remembered the doubt that had plagued her during the years of building alliances. She remembered wondering if humanity's experiment would succeed, or if they would become another forgotten species, erased from history like the Prethkai. They had succeeded, not alone, but in partnership with others. Not by being the strongest, but by being the most open. Not by hoarding knowledge, but by sharing it so widely that no one could ever erase it again. A young researcher from a species Chun did not recognize approached her after the ceremony. The being was small and covered in soft blue fur, with eyes that seemed to reflect the stars. "Dr. Chun," the young one said, "I wanted to thank you. My people were isolated for generations. We thought we had learned everything there was to know. Then your messages reached us. The knowledge you shared, the connections you showed us, they changed everything." Chun smiled. "What did you do with what you learned?" "We found mistakes in our oldest theories," the young one replied. "Errors we had accepted as truth for thousands of years. We corrected them. And then we found something new, something we never would have discovered without your help." "What did you find?" The young one's eyes brightened. "A question. A beautiful question that we do not know how to answer. We thought you might help us search for it." Chun laughed, a sound full of joy and wonder despite her years. "That is the best gift you could give me. A new question to explore." She took the young one's hand, and together they walked toward the future. Toward answers no one had yet imagined, and questions no one had yet thought to ask. Behind them, the monument gleamed in the light of a star that had watched humanity grow from primitive hunters to galactic citizens in the blink of a cosmic eye. The galaxy had changed. It would keep changing, faster than anyone could predict, driven by curious minds that refused to accept that learning had limits. And somewhere, in the mathematical constants that underlay reality itself, the Prethkai finally rested. Their message had been found. Their warning had been heard. Their sacrifice had not been in vain. Humanity had learned the lesson they had tried to teach. And this time, the fire of knowledge would not be extinguished.